Away income from the club. The club see nothing of this. The fans have been complaining about the quality of merchandise they've been buying in the streets, and a lot of the fans think it's our merchandise and it's authorised in the streets, and it isn't. And this is the
Arsenal plan to apply for a court order to destroy the counterfeit goods, and more operations to obliterate the pirates will take place. Meanwhile, managers of the club's shops say that's the place to buy real Arsenal merchandise.
The Queen has opened the biggest ever development in the City of London in spectacular style. The Broadgate Centre covers 30 acres and cost £2 billion to build. This afternoon, hundreds of office workers looked on as the Queen officially opened the complex amid fireworks and a Christmas pageant. More than 40 financial institutions have already moved in, together with 1 in 10 of the city workforce. And the main story in the region tonight, the Court of Appeal has formally quashed the convictions of Engin Raghip and Mark Braithwaite for murdering PC Keith Blakelock during the Broadwater Farm riot in 1985. The 3 judges ruled that the cases against the men who were freed last week were unsafe and unsatisfactory. Winston Silcott has already been cleared of murder. The court apologised for the suffering caused to the men as a result of the shortcomings of the criminal process. Supporters said tonight that they would begin a private prosecution if there's no official action against the detective who led the murder inquiry. And the Thames weather, as the traditional Norwegian Christmas tree lights up Trafalgar Square. Tonight, dry and cloudy, with a low of -2 Celsius and the chance of a ground frost. And tomorrow will start cloudy, but will brighten up later. The high, 7 Celsius, that's 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the Thames News on Thursday, December the 5th. Good night.
Next Monday at 9, experience the frantic world of Wall Street.
I need the information now. No, in 10 minutes it's history. At 4 o'clock I'm a dinosaur.
Starring Michael Douglas.
Greed is good. Greed works.
Charlie Sheen.
There is no nobility in poverty anymore, Dad.
Daryl Hannah and Martin Sheen.
He's using you, kid.
You're not inside, you are outside, okay? The real question is whether you got what it takes to stay.
A movie premiere for next Monday night on Thames.
Coming next on Thames, the Maxwell scandal, countdown to Maastricht, the Queen in Broadgate, the BT sell-off, the drinks industry, all the latest gossip and lots more. Stay tuned.
It's missed again.
Mrs. Moore.
Oh, don't you pay anymore, Mrs. Moore. Mrs. Moore, please don't pay anymore.
What you want is a price that's low, so why mess around, cause it's a rumble-o.
If you want to look after your bread, you only have to use your head. You're dealing with the pro when you shop at Rumble-O. Don't pay anymore, Mrs. Moore.
Separate detergent and softener could mean spending more than you need. Stop. Why buy 2? Just buy Bold. It's where the smart money goes.
Listen to others if you will, but only one sense can discern true quality. Mandate.
5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here on Thames before 01, this week's edition of the City Programme.
Should the city have predicted the Maxwell collapse?
Well, lots of people should have spotted the blue litmus turning red. The Bank of England for one.
Good evening. Latest on the Maxwell scandal in a moment. And in Cityline, Douglas Morford on the pension plundering and the bank borrowings involved in the saga. Also tonight, the final countdown to Maastricht and EMU. How does city and industry line up?
Money is, for me, a convenience and not a piece of national bunting. So from my point of view, the sooner we get on with it and the more committed we are to EMU, the better.
We preview the market in the oversubscribed BT share issue and analyse why the recession's taken the froth off the drinks industry's profits.
It's been one of the most difficult trading environments for 10 years.
David Cocker of Chemical Bank is here to discuss sterling, the mark and the dollar. And as Her Majesty the Queen opens Broadgate, we ask, are its developers skating on thin ice?
Well, I think we got a lot of this right, but we got some of it wrong. I think one should be open about that.
Tonight, as City programme predicted last week, Mirror Group newspapers is up for sale. So is everything else in the Maxwell empire, which has at last collapsed with the appointment today of administrators to its two ultimate British holding companies. In a moment, should the City have seen the catastrophe coming? But first, today's frantic events.
The Maxwell brothers had planned to meet bankers tomorrow when their debt standstill was due to expire. But events telescoped when it became obvious no workable rescue plan could be produced. The High Court appointed administrators, Arthur Anderson, confirmed this afternoon that the liabilities of the private companies, £1.4 billion, significantly exceed assets. Now everything is up for grabs, including the majority stakes in the public companies, Maxwell Communications, thought in the City to be worthless, and Mirror Group newspapers. In a separate move, the Swiss Bank Corporation today called in the receivers at one Maxwell subsidiary, which owes it £55 million. Other banks with a charge on specific assets are at the top of the payout list, but even they face losses. The question for the City tonight is, should it have known better, and should people in the know have spoken out?
Every securities analyst that I know, I think, believed that Robert Maxwell was a crook, and none of us would recommend purchasing shares in Maxwell Communications. The great problem was that anyone who said anything along those lines or anywhere near that was threatened with litigation.
But the banks have incurred tremendously high bad debts, and one could question the efficacy of their whole credit assessment procedures, not just for Maxwell, but also perhaps for Polypec and for British and Commonwealth and so on. And there is a case to answer here that the banks have been rather generous and possibly slightly imprudent in their lending practices.
Imprudent banks perhaps, but are there others at fault? A question I put to Kenneth Warren MP, Chairman of the Commons Select Committee on Trade and Industry.
There are faults in the regulatory system. It's not been in place that long, but obviously we cannot go on with a system which allows problems like this to hit the financial scene, to hit people's futures, and I think they've got to tighten up their act.
Well, who should have known what was going on?
Well, lots of people should have spotted the blue litmus turning red. The Bank of England, for one, has a clear duty to look after regulation of the money which has been invested in banks by private individuals, by companies, and then is lent on. They didn't do the job, and neither did the banks do the job. I simply don't understand how you could lend a man who had already been cited 20 years ago as unfit to run a company to just go and help himself virtually to the till.
Mr. Maxwell himself is obviously not around to pay the penalty for this mess, but there were people whose business it was to know what was going on. What action will you be calling for to be taken against them?
Well, the Select Committee has got to decide if it's going to look at this. We're going to be interviewing Sir David Walker of SIB in 2 weeks' time and ask him how he sees the agencies functioning for which he's responsible, and also to look to him for ideas based on City experience. Coupled with that, I think our own parliamentary knowledge and experience, we might be able to make some suggestions which will help. Clearly there's got to be fast action, because who knows what else is going on.
Well, do you think there are other potential Maxwell situations likely to explode on us?
Well, I don't know, but I would like to be sure there are people probing around to find out. It's sad when we always get action after an event. I believe that organisations like the Serious Fraud Office, the DTI, the Bank of England, the regulatory organisations ought to be probing continually, sampling, finding out. That way we might scare away the bad guys.
Tonight, the editor of The European said it may close tomorrow. In New York, the Maxwell-owned Daily News filed for protection from its creditors. And a spokesman for media tycoon Kerry Packer told the City programme exclusively Packer had not even thought about any of the Maxwell properties.
The revelation that Robert Maxwell pillaged his company's pension fund leaves open more questions than it answers. Asking one or two of them, here's Douglas Moffat and City Line.
With Maxwell gone, all of a sudden the companies, meaning the remaining directors and trustees, are discovering all sorts of things which just prove the truth of that notorious DTI report into Pergamon in the 1960s, which concluded that Maxwell could not be relied on to exercise proper stewardship of a publicly quoted company. It seems he got worse since. To shuffle assets around your publicly quoted companies and treat their cash balances as your personal piggy bank is one thing, but to do the same with the assets of one of your company's pension funds is quite another. I don't believe we should accept that Mr. Maxwell was really the only person who knew about all the recent transactions. Both shareholders and pensioners need to ask what all the remaining directors and trustees were doing while all this was going on. The force of Maxwell's personality was undoubtedly overpowering. One Mirror employee says it robbed people of their judgment. But directors and trustees do have a legal responsibility to make sure they know what's going on. Company law provides stiff penalties for not doing so, and MCC and MGN directors better have some good answers ready. Pension fund law, by contrast, is atrociously weak. It's clearly a nonsense that it allows a company's pension fund to be managed by a related company and in turn invested in other related companies. But if you agree to be a trustee of such an odd animal, then your duty of care and diligence is all the greater, not less. Pension law clearly needs reforming, as the government promises, but not, I think, by restricting where funds can invest, rather by defining more clearly those criteria of diligence and providing more penalties for trustees' failure to comply.
Thank you, Douglas. With just 3 days to go until the crucial European summit on political and monetary union in Maastricht, the diplomatic manoeuvring is reaching fever pitch. And although the consensus is that some kind of deal will be achieved, the debate over whether or not EMU would be good for British companies and the city has been somewhat overshadowed. David Strawn reviews the arguments.
At the Dutch town of Maastricht next week, by far the most vigorous argument will be reserved for political union. That's because the broad thrust of an agreement on monetary union has already been hammered out in pre-summit negotiations. EMU means a single independent central bank in control of a single currency, the EQ, and a single set of interest rates. It comes into effect any time from 1997 onwards that a majority of EC members agree to it, whose economies and currencies have performed well enough. The most obvious benefit to both the travelling public and British companies would be the elimination of money changing within the EMU bloc, estimated to cost Europe £10 billion annually. Companies like Cadbury Schweppes, for example, which operates in 9 European countries, would benefit greatly from,
on the one hand, simplicity, one currency instead of many, and the other point would be certainty, that we would take out some of the uncertainty that exists because of the fluctuations that we currently have to cope with on exchange rates.
What would it actually mean to you financially?
It would certainly save us money. It's very difficult to put a precise figure, but I would say not less than £6 million, and it could be quite a bit more than that.
In the wider economy, it's argued that the discipline of the new German-style Euro-Fed would give us low German-style rates of inflation, a good thing to lock ourselves into. But others say, despite Britain's appalling monetary record, we're better off out of it.
European monetary policy will not be run by the Bundesbank. It will be run by a completely new institution whose precise characteristics we do not yet know. Now, by contrast, in Britain, the attitude to monetary policy is changing radically, and there is a very real alternative for Britain, which is, of course, to make the Bank of England independent. And then we would have an independent central bank compared against a new institution in Europe, which in all likelihood would have considerable euro political influence.
In the city, EMU would hit bank profits from foreign exchange dealing, a unified EQ leaving fewer currencies to trade. But that would be true whether Britain was in or out. UK entry is also irrelevant to the siting of the new central bank. The EC's Eastern European Aid Bank, the EBRD, recently established its boardroom in London, so Euro politics will mean the Euro Fed is almost bound to go elsewhere. Even so, some say the city will suffer if Britain stays out.
If there were to be a currency bloc, and that's 97, quite a while from now, and we weren't in it, we'd be like Canada compared with the States. And no one puts their business in Canada to deal with the American market. Companies would steadily build up their new businesses in the currency area, on the continent, Amsterdam, Frankfurt somewhere, and London would find it disadvantageous in that situation, very much so.
Others argue that staying out is just what the city needs. It could even flourish as a kind of offshore banking centre.
London has prospered over the years precisely because it has not been tightly regulated. and it's prospered in contrast, of course, to Frankfurt and Paris, which, although they've come up in recent years, are still nowhere near London's importance. Now, the danger for the city, it seems to me, within a common European system, is that we could have a tighter system of regulations, including enforced high reserve requirements placed upon banks in the city, and that will actually nobble Britain in competition with other world financial centres.
The one EMU problem still to be resolved at Maastricht is the clause allowing opting out from the single currency. Britain wants one, but not by itself. The rest of Europe doesn't want powerful countries like Germany to have the right to pull out if it changes its mind. It looks as if Britain will have to concede. But EMU won't be achieved unless there's an agreement on political union, where difficult issues such as defence, social policy and majority voting still separate nations. But some say a treaty is almost inevitable, given the likely costs of failure.
If there is not a deal at Maastricht, the whole credibility of the exchange rate mechanism will be put into question. All the currencies against the Deutschmark will come under pressure, but in particular I think sterling will come under tremendous pressure.
So what would happen then?
Well, I think we'd either have to raise rates very substantially or tolerate a devaluation which would undermine the whole credibility of our anti-inflation policy.
At Maastricht next week, the same pressures will threaten all EC members bar Germany. So like it or not, a deal on EMU looks highly likely.
People who've applied for BT shares have a better chance of getting the slice they want than in previous state sell-offs. Heavy demand means the government's almost certain to make more shares available. And as Paul Larsman reports, to increase the proportion going to the public.
The public offer is closed, but there's still a way the private investor can squeeze into BT. The retail tender, where individuals bid alongside the institutions, remains open for one more day. There are no sweeteners and you will need a broker. But Henderson Crossthwaite's Eric Hawthorne says it's a way of getting a bigger slice of some interesting action.
The annualized yield is really very special and well worth going for, and gives you a very good incentive also for putting the shares that you are allocated into a PEP.
So what would your advice be? Hang on right the way through, or get out after the first payment or the second?
I think there's a case for hanging on the whole way through. But those who are looking at it primarily as a stag and as an income source, I think would do very well to consider paying up the second call and then thinking again about whether they wanted to pay up on the final call.
ShareLink, Europe's biggest execution-only broker, runs one of 8 shops appointed by the government, largely to encourage share ownership, an area where it's claimed much remains to be done.
We need an industry geared just for private investment and not one that tries to bundle the private investor in with institutional activities. They don't mix. Secondly, I think we need taxation changes, not CGT changes. I think we need changes in tax to allow people to invest their earned income directly into shares without it being taxed in the first place. And thirdly, and I think very importantly, we need attitude changes. We need people to stop talking about share-only democracies and actually doing something about it.
As ever, the final BT price will be decided by the level of institutional interest, a last-minute affair.
It closes at 5:30 on Friday, so I think what they'll do is wait until the stock market closes at 4:30, and that gives them an hour, basically, to get their tender in. As far as the guidelines we've been given so far, then really it's a bit of cat and mouse, I think, is being played a little bit with institutions, and I think there what we'll probably likely to see is that some will bid above the current price, some will bid below. The government indications so far is that a substantial proportion have bid between 5p and 15p above the current share price, but I think equally quite a number have bid below the current share price as well.
Well, as the market closed tonight, there's certainly been some downward pressure on the likely premium come Monday. Financial bookmakers IG Index opened at 138 pence. There's been some selling. Their price is now down to 133. Downward pressure, but nice profits all the same. 8 pence for the institutions as things stand, and no less than 23 pence for the public.
The fall in profits disclosed this week by Britain's largest brewer, Bass, shows that the recession has hit even the normally bubbly drink sector. Bad summer weather meant fewer pints were pulled, and long-term the industry is worried about changes in the country's drinking habits. Even so, good figures today from Grand Metropolitan show that some drinks companies are still in high spirits.
Britain may feel like drowning its sorrows in drink, but the brewers and distillers say recession has hit their sales. We're drinking 7% less beer this year, and that means even though the average price of a pint has gone up 20 pence, industry profits have lost their traditional fizz. In the circumstances, the city was pleased with the £500 million figure served up this week by Bass, even though it was down almost £30 million on last year.
It's been one of the most difficult trading environments for 10 years. We've seen a considerable downturn in consumer expenditure, which is a very important ingredient of our business.
Despite the profit falls, for Whitbread it's the first for 16 years, the brewers and distillers are coping better than others in the consumer sector. The city recognises this, and shares in the drinks companies have outperformed the market since the summer. But while their recessionary hangover could soon be gone, the brewers in particular face a long-term problem. That's Britain's ageing population.
There obviously are negatives in demographics in terms of the 18 to 30 young lager drinker. There are going to be few of those on the ground, which is a negative, particularly for beer volumes.
To counter the trend, the industry is courting the family market with plusher pubs, bar food and soft drinks. But for those companies who concentrate more on spirits, the local problems of the UK market aren't so worrying.
We are talking about a much more international business. And clearly, although spirits trading, particularly in the UK or in the US, is pretty difficult at the moment, elsewhere in the world, in the Far East and in Southern Europe in particular, there are still some very strong trends of growth in spirits.
It's the increasing globalisation of the spirits market since the 1970s that's provided a tonic to companies like Allied Lions, makers of Beefeater gin, who have large spirits divisions. Best placed is Grand Met, who last year pulled out of brewing completely and today announced drinks profits up more than 20%.
During this year, J&B whisky has done particularly well, and we've passed 6 million cases for the first time, and that's done particularly well on the continent of Europe. Smirnoff has held up well despite falling volumes. Bailey's liqueur has also shown considerable growth, particularly in Germany, but right across the continent of Europe.
In the UK, the drink sector is hoping Christmas sales will lift industry spirits. But for those companies where the accent is on beer, the future is looking rather cloudy. We'll take a break now. Coming up in part 2, Her Majesty the Queen and the jewel in the city's crown. Inside financial gossip in City File, and Chemicals' David Cocker on current currency fluctuations. Stay tuned.
To test German engineering in tires, we put Continental's new Aqua Contact through its paces in a swimming pool. Continental tires, German engineering where you need it most on a car.
This year's Christmas will be a bit different. Special trimmings with the turkey, Paul's favourite pavlova, new chocolate bonbons.
Hey, Daddy, ice cream!
Right, just look at all that. And Rachel, white chocolate gatto. That's why Mum's gone to Iceland.
Night. Donna, I need 50 copies of these for the morning. Where's everyone going?
Home? Remember home?
I'm working late too. Dinner. Client.
Still after that bit of foreign business?
Don't stay all night.
Can I put supper on expenses?
Of course you can. Ciao!
Rank Xerox copies produce perfect copies time after time in next to no time. And they're available with a unique total satisfaction guarantee. But don't tell your boss.
Cappuccino.
Evening, Donna.
Faxing, scanning, copying, printing. Rank Xerox, the document company.
How do you clear a blocked nose? With a decongestant pill or with Vicks Sinex? Because Sinex goes straight to your nose, it goes straight to work. A decongestant pill works too, but it has to get into your system before it gets to work on your nose. And the one that usually lasts longer is Sinex. Works in seconds, lasts for up to 8 hours.
For centuries, mankind has looked to the heavens for the extraordinary. And now it can again, in the friendly skies. Introducing Connoisseur Class, only on United. A truly elevated form of international business class. Come fly the airline that's uniting the world. Come fly the friendly skies.
Welcome back. The Queen officially opened Broadgate today, setting the seal on what's become the city's most acclaimed development. But despite that acclaim, the site's developers, Rosehor and Stanhope, are deeply in debt and barely breaking even on the whole Broadgate project. Broadgate was lit up tonight as the Queen arrived to give a royal pat on the back to developers Godfrey Bradman of Rosehor and Stuart Lipton of Stanhope for creating a new and distinctive city landmark. Sadly, the quality of Broadgate's cash flow hasn't been as high as its aesthetics. Developers Rosehor and Stanhope were building into a recession. As the floors went up, city rents were coming down.
At the time it started, people believed that rents were going to carry on growing. So they let the buildings at, say, £40 a square foot on the assumption that at the first rent review, the rents would be about £60 a square foot. That hasn't happened. So in the interim, until rents do start rising, there is going to be a massive shortfall between the interest paid and the rental income.
The result for Rosehor and Stanhope has been a one-way ticket for their share price downwards, as both companies fell into loss, leaving the firms at a fraction of their former value.
It's rather fun to look out.
Despite it all, Stanhope's chief executive, Stuart Lipton, remains frankly proud of the Broadgate development, which is now home to an estimated 20,000 city workers. He admits with hindsight that things might have been done differently.
Well, I think we got a lot of this right, but we got some of it wrong. I think one should be open about that. We should have sold some buildings probably in the latter part of 88, 89. That was a mistake not to. We got the place right, we got the quality right, we got the environment right. And what we've proved here is that we can let space, even in these difficult times.
Fresh proof on that score arrived last month when the much sought-after European bank chose Broadgate as its London headquarters. The development is now almost fully let. With the first rent reviews pending, Rosehor believe income from the project can only improve.
Whilst it is true to say at the moment that we are in the business of debt management, one likes to believe, certainly within Rosehor and Stanhope, that we are able to manage that business effectively. And certainly if we look to the future and with the imminent rent reviews here at Broadgate, which is an ongoing cycle, given the length of time in which the tenants have taken occupation, that rental stream will only increase as indeed the market improves in the coming years.
But however troubled the future after Broadgate, it looks as if Rosehor and Stanhope will face it together. The city programme understands a long-awaited merger announcement is now imminent, although the merged entities will be laden with a massive amount of debt.
I can't see the benefits, quite frankly. The advantage is, I suppose, that you get Broadgate under one roof. But then that, of course, means that you increase the indebtedness of the company, because at the moment both companies have been able to deny the debt because it's off balance sheet. Now, if they merge, they're going to have to bring it on balance sheet. That's an extra £1.5 billion of debt.
But property, as they say, is cyclical. And Rosehor and Stanhope now have their eyes on the 134-acre King's Cross development to build them back into profit. And this time, says Stuart Lipton, they'll finance things differently.
The future, I think, will be a much more restricted future in terms of development in the next few years. Far fewer speculative buildings built, probably only small ones. The major buildings will probably be partnerships between the occupier and the developer, and probably a different financing method too.
Cynics might say that two loss-making developers have little choice but to look for partners. But if they find them, maybe King's Cross will get the royal assent too sometime in the next century.
Now, a costly encounter on the cards, why brokers will be working this Sunday, and how to save £700. Read all about it. Here's City File.
First, the BCCI net widens. Two green charities have joined the long list of the bank's creditors. Care for the Wild and the Royal Society for Nature Conservation had over 8,000 affinity credit card holders between them when the bank collapsed, owing them thousands of pounds. But the last laugh goes to Friends of the Earth, who'd refused to run the affinity scheme, saying they didn't want to fuel the credit boom. The City File's verdict: obviously they're not as green as they look. Sunday trading may now be commonplace in the high street, but the stock exchange won't open its doors even to announce BT share allocations in time for Monday's first day of dealing. Who's left with egg on their face? Lead managers Warburgs, who picked a Monday rather than the usual midweek start of trading. Arrangements have been hastily made, with brokers forced to phone a hotline to order a fax of the announcement. Still, at least it will swell BT's coffers still further. Good news for city folk desperate to avoid ploughing through the weekend financial pages. This City Press Review promises to deliver all the essential reading in one handy volume, first thing Monday morning. The bad news: a year's subscription costs a hefty £975, with reductions for bulk buying, of course, but it's still £700 more than getting the papers themselves. What price a Sunday lie-in? Now, do you have the muscle to kidnap Frank Bruno or climb Snowdon in December? These are just two of the challenges issued in the past by a city charity raising money for Romanian orphans. Team Challenge have already signed up Chase Manhattan and BT, but won't deliver their Mission Impossible task till next Wednesday. City File's suggestion: find a bank willing to lend money to a Maxwell company. Happy hunting.
One thing which could really have soured the atmosphere ahead of the Maastricht summit next week would have been a rise in German interest rates. Well, the Bundesbank today again resisted that temptation, despite its evident concern about domestic inflationary pressures. David Cocker, why didn't they put up their rates today?
Well, it looks as if on this occasion they've actually bowed to political pressure from Bonn to ensure that we do have a smooth entry to the Maastricht summit next week. However, most of the regional Bundesbank members are extremely concerned about inflation in the German economy because of very high wage demands. So it would not surprise me at all to see an interest rate rise in Germany in 2 weeks' time at the next Bundesbank Council meeting.
Well, there didn't seem to be quite the same feeling of impending crisis for sterling today as there was 2 weeks ago. Has anything changed in the 2 weeks?
I think we're beginning to see more evidence of a slowing German economy, and the markets are beginning to feel that maybe German interest rates will not have to rise as much as previously expected in order to try and combat German inflation. So the market now is really only looking for a 0.25% rise in the Lombard rate and maybe a 0.5% rise in the discount rate.
But has sterling's position really changed at all?
Not really, no, because sterling's weak position in the exchange rate mechanism is as much to do with the weakness of the US dollar currently as it is to do with the strength of the Deutschmark. What's happening, I think, is that we're seeing money which is moving out of a weak US economy, trying to pick an economy which is still growing, which in this instance happens to be Germany. The UK is suffering from the fact that we're seen as being in exactly the same boat as the US.
Well, how important is the agreement next week? Will the markets really take that much notice in the short term?
Yes, I believe they will, but I don't think that they'll necessarily look at the detail of the agreement. I think as long as the tone is suggesting that the member states are prepared to move forward together at this point in time, the markets will react positively.
Well, if nothing has changed for sterling and the strain is still there in the ERM, when's the crunch going to come?
Well, the crunch will probably come in the early part of next year if President Bush does not bring some sort of fiscal package forward, because otherwise it looks very difficult to see the US economy actually coming out of this recession before at least the middle of next year. So therefore, if the dollar continues to be sold very aggressively, which it would be under those circumstances, then sterling will remain weak against the Deutschmark.
Are we going to see international concern about the position of the dollar mounting over the winter?
There is a key crucial level, I think, which is probably 1 mark and 55 pfennigs against the dollar, which if the markets were to take it below that, you would find the dollar selling being accelerated, at which point I suspect we would see G7 meetings and concerted intervention.
David Cocker, thank you very much. Steve.
And that's it. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, from Danielle, myself and everyone on the City Programme team, we wish you a very good night. Good night.